There were moments when America seemed to hold its breath, when Johnny Carson smiled, and with just a raised eyebrow, a celebrity guest began to squirm. For 3 decades, Carson wasn't just a talk show host, he was a late-night confidant to the stars. With that calm voice and a knack for gentle but piercing questions, he made guests feel safe enough to open up, sometimes a little too much. What made him extraordinary was his uncanny instinct for spotting a lie. He didn't need to accuse anyone, just a knowing smile, and the truth surfaced on its own. When someone exaggerated, embellished, or tried to rewrite their past, Carson had a way of letting honesty quietly reclaim the stage. Tonight, we revisit those unforgettable moments when Johnny's human lie detector flickered to life on live television, when Hollywood's polished stories met Carson's subtle pursuit of truth. And it all begins with one man, who simply wanted to seem a bit younger, and walked straight into his own charming little trap. Tony Curtis walked onto the Tonight Show stage to the sound of applause that seemed to embrace him like an old friend. He looked every bit the movie star he had always been, charming smile, flawless hair, the effortless grace of someone who once defined Hollywood cool. Johnny Carson greeted him warmly. They exchanged jokes, and the air felt light, almost nostalgic. When Tony began talking about his days in the Navy during World War II, the audience leaned in. His voice was animated, filled with pride and vivid detail. But Johnny's expression changed ever so slightly. He listened carefully, his sharp mind silently tracing the dates Tony mentioned. And then, with that signature calmness, he asked, "How old were you at that time?" The question seemed simple, almost casual. Tony paused. He chuckled, 17. Maybe 16? He shrugged, trying to brush it off, but something about his tone gave it away. The math didn't work. If what he said were true, he would have been far too young to enlist. The audience caught on, and laughter spread through the room like a gentle wave. Johnny didn't press him. He didn't need to. He simply smiled, that knowing, mischievous smile, and let the silence finish the job. Tony joined in the laughter, realizing he'd just tripped over his own story. A camera operator later said, "You could see that little spark in Johnny's eyes. Not cruel, just amused." He knew he'd found the truth, but he'd never use it to embarrass anyone. After the show, Carson reportedly laughed about it with his crew. "Tony should have skipped the war story if he still wants to be 8 years younger," he quipped. That was Johnny, perceptive, humorous, but never mean-spirited. Tony Curtis came from the golden age of the studio system, when Hollywood shaped its stars like porcelain, perfect, polished, and, if needed, a few years younger on paper. Back then, pretending to be 28 instead of 36 wasn't lying. It was business. But decades later, that habit lingered, and Carson's innocent question peeled back a layer Tony probably didn't even realize he was still wearing. What made the moment unforgettable wasn't the gotcha. It was the grace in how Johnny handled it. He knew the difference between exposing and revealing. One humiliates, the other enlightens. Carson chose the latter every time. He never used truth as a weapon, he used it as a mirror. Watching the clip years later, people didn't laugh at Tony. They smiled at the humanity in it. A man, once larger than life, momentarily became one of us, trying to hold on to youth, to relevance, to the version of himself that once ruled the screen. Tony later admitted he found the whole thing funny. "Johnny had those eyes," he said. "When he looked at you, you just knew he already knew." That's what made Carson different. He wasn't there to catch people lying, he was there to remind them that honesty, even awkward, unplanned honesty, was what truly connected them to the audience. That brief exchange between Tony Curtis and Johnny Carson has since become one of those quiet, golden moments of television, where truth met kindness, and humor softened reality's edges. It reminded everyone watching that even the brightest stars are still human, still vulnerable to time, and that maybe, just maybe, there's beauty in letting that truth shine through. Some guests came to Johnny Carson not just to promote a new movie or project, but to tell stories about themselves, stories that sometimes touched hearts, and sometimes were so fanciful they made everyone laugh. And no one illustrated that better than Zsa Zsa Gabor, the woman who turned her own life into a glittering performance. When she stepped onto the Tonight Show stage, Zsa Zsa always looked as if she had just come from a royal ball in Budapest. Her hair was perfectly styled, her jewelry sparkled, and her voice carried the refined tone of European elegance. She didn't just tell stories, she became them. People didn't come to hear about her films, but to hear her talk about herself, the woman who claimed to be a Hungarian princess. Acclaimed Johnny Carson, with his sharp instincts and quiet skepticism, never truly believed. That evening, Johnny sat with his arms crossed, a faint smile on his lips. Zsa Zsa spoke of her royal family, of wine-filled banquets in Vienna, and gentlemen who once knelt before her. The story grew more dazzling, and less believable. When she paused for a sip of water, Carson tilted his head, eyes twinkling. Zsa Zsa, he asked softly, is that an actual title? Or more of a Hollywood one? The audience burst into laughter. Zsa Zsa smiled, perfectly poised. My dear Johnny, she replied, in Europe, nobility isn't something you have, it's something you feel. She lifted her hand gracefully, as if ending a scene in a play she starred in. Carson didn't say another word. He just smiled and glanced at the audience. Laughter filled the room, not in mockery, but in shared understanding. Johnny had quietly drawn the line between truth and illusion, between Princess Zsa Zsa and the charming woman sitting before him. One of the show's directors later said, Johnny never called anyone a liar. He just made the truth so obvious that everyone could see it without him saying a thing. That's what made the moment with Zsa Zsa so iconic. There was no humiliation, no cruelty, only a witty exchange where each person stayed in character. Johnny, the calm and clever host. Zsa Zsa, the self-made star of her own kingdom. Backstage, the crew laughed as Carson entered the dressing room, shaking his head. If she's the Princess of Hungary, he said, then I'm the King of Nebraska. But there was no bitterness in his tone, only amusement and a hint of admiration. In a way, Zsa Zsa had won. She didn't need a real crown, she only needed people to believe in the dream she created. And that night, millions did, if only for a few minutes. Zsa Zsa Gabor was one of the earliest examples of being famous for being famous. She didn't need a role to define her, because she was her own performance. The royal tales, the European mystique, all told with such charm that no one really wanted to question them. But Carson was different. He valued truth, even in its smallest form. So whenever she appeared, there was always a subtle dance between them, a storyteller and a truth-teller, both fully aware of the game. A longtime producer once said that Johnny had different levels of tolerance for different lies. If someone's fabrication could hurt others, he wouldn't hesitate to challenge them. But harmless myths like Zsa Zsa's, he handled with grace. Sometimes with a raised eyebrow, a teasing question, or a knowing smile. He made the audience laugh, the producer said, but he always let the guests keep their dignity. No one ever left feeling embarrassed. In fact, they liked him more. Zsa Zsa returned to The Tonight Show many times after that. Each time, the story of the Hungarian princess resurfaced, like a running joke between old friends. Johnny would smile and ask, so tonight, are you wearing the real crown or the copy? And she would reply with a mysterious grin, darling Johnny, to me, everything is real. The audience would erupt in laughter, understanding that in show business, the line between truth and illusion is thin, and Zsa Zsa knew exactly how to sparkle on it. Those nights didn't just make people laugh. They reminded viewers why Johnny Carson was so special. He wasn't just a talk show host, he was a quiet guardian of truth, someone who let people be themselves, even when themselves was a beautifully crafted illusion. And Zsa Zsa Gabor, the self-proclaimed princess, perhaps knew better than anyone that in the world of lights and laughter, a beautiful lie can still be loved. As long as it makes people smile. Johnny Carson could sense something was wrong before a single word was spoken. That night with Truman Capote was one of them. The famous author, once celebrated for his wit and sharp storytelling, stepped onto the Tonight Show stage looking like a ghost of his former self. His steps were uneven, his smile uncertain, his voice trembling under the studio lights. Carson's instincts kicked in immediately. He'd interviewed hundreds of stars, but this wasn't the charming, mischievous Capote he knew, this was a man struggling to stay afloat. When Johnny asked softly, "Are you feeling all right, Truman?" Capote forced a laugh and said he was fine, just tired. But everyone knew it wasn't true. A producer watching from the control room later recalled, it wasn't just that he was drunk. It was that he was pretending he wasn't, and that broke Johnny's heart. Carson tried everything to save the interview. He shifted topics, asked about Capote's latest book, tried to draw out the humor that had once lit up the room. But Capote's thoughts began to scatter. His words slurred, his stories drifted. At times, he seemed to forget where he was. The audience, once amused, grew silent. The tension was almost physical. Finally, Carson did something he almost never did, he ended the segment early. With a quiet cue, they cut to commercials. When the show returned, Truman Capote was gone. Carson continued with the next guest, his professionalism unbroken, but there was a heaviness in his eyes that no camera could hide. Afterward, backstage was somber. No one spoke much. They all knew they had just witnessed something tragic, not a failed interview, but the public unraveling of a man who had once seemed untouchable. NBC never aired that segment again. No photos, no clips, no replays. It was buried. But those who were there never forgot. Johnny wasn't angry, a senior producer later said. He was deeply sad. He told us it wasn't funny, it was watching someone destroy himself while denying it was happening. After that night, Truman Capote never returned to The Tonight Show. Johnny made sure of it, not out of resentment, but respect. He believed in giving people a chance to recover, not to humiliate themselves. That's what made him different. That's what made him human. For all his sharp wit and impeccable timing, Johnny Carson's greatest strength was empathy, the quiet kind that doesn't need words. That night wasn't remembered for laughter or applause. It was remembered for something much rarer on television, a moment of painful, honest humanity, shared in silence between two men, both aware that sometimes the truth hurts most when it's denied. Robert Blake was once a familiar face to American audiences, a man with piercing eyes, a firm voice, and an unmistakable presence. He was the heart of the hit TV series Beretta, where his tough yet just character captured the admiration of millions. But behind that success lingered an unpleasant rumor, that Blake was hot-tempered, difficult to work with, and at times, unable to control his emotions on set. When he appeared on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson in the late 1970s, Blake seemed determined to silence those whispers once and for all. He sat upright, eyes sharp, posture rigid. When Carson casually mentioned his reputation for being hard to please, Blake immediately responded. "I have never yelled at a single crew member," he declared. His voice didn't tremble, it was filled with conviction. "Those are just stupid Hollywood rumors. I take my work seriously, but I respect everyone I work with." The audience applauded. But Carson didn't. He tilted his head slightly, raised one eyebrow, and smiled, just enough to make a statement without a word. It was that signature expression The Tonight Show crew famously called Carson Gold. It needed no words, no sound, yet it spoke volumes. The laughter that rippled through the audience wasn't mocking, it was a silent acknowledgement that something deeper was happening. Because just a few hours earlier, before filming began, Robert Blake had indeed yelled at a member of The Tonight Show staff. A stage manager later recalled, "Johnny was right there. He didn't interfere, just watched. But you could tell from his eyes, he wasn't happy." So when Blake claimed on air that he had never lost his temper with a crew member, Carson didn't have to say a thing. He simply arched his brow, nodded slightly, and the crowd burst into laughter. No one was humiliated, no one called out, yet the message was crystal clear. After the show, Carson reportedly told Ed McMahon, half joking, half serious, he was barking at a stagehand an hour ago. The comment wasn't cruel, just tinged with disappointment. For Carson, it wasn't about one small lie, it was about crossing a moral line he didn't tolerate, disrespecting the people who made the show possible. Carson believed that The Tonight Show was a team effort, not a stage for any single star. He once said, "The guests might shine, but it's the crew who keeps the lights on." So when he saw someone treat his team poorly, he couldn't pretend it didn't matter. Yet, he never chose confrontation. Carson knew live television was a double-edged sword, one public accusation could turn entertainment into scandal. Instead, he chose subtlety, letting his expressions speak louder than any words. One longtime producer put it best, Johnny could make the whole country understand what he was thinking with just one eyebrow raise. No one else could do that. Many from Carson's crew later confirmed that Blake's temper wasn't new. He was talented, but had a short fuse, one recalled. And Johnny had zero tolerance for people who disrespected his staff. For Carson, temper could be forgiven, ego could be teased, but lack of respect was unforgivable. That's what made that moment so special, not because Carson caught Blake in a lie, but because he defended his team with quiet grace. His subtle gesture was a reminder that Carson's loyalty didn't belong to the powerful, but to those behind the scenes. In that small, wordless smile, the entire spirit of The Tonight Show was captured, a balance of truth, kindness, and wit. In the years that followed, the story of Carson and Blake became a well-known legend in television circles. People would say Johnny was at the peak of his craft, saying everything without uttering a word. The show stayed lighthearted, the audience laughed, and only the observant few understood that behind those laughs was a profound lesson, about honesty, respect, and what it truly means to stand for what's right. Madonna has always been the embodiment of rebellion, not just in music, but in the way she forced the world to reconsider the boundaries between art and provocation. In 1987, when she appeared on The Tonight Show starring Johnny Carson, she was at the peak of her fame. Her controversial music videos, daring performances, and image intertwined with sexual liberation and inverted religious symbolism had made her name a cultural storm. But that night, in the warm glow of the studio, her confidence suddenly met a wall named Johnny Carson. From the very first moments of the interview, the audience held their breath. Carson, calm and composed, with that knowing glint in his eyes, gently hinted, "Some people say you're trying to shock the audience." Madonna laughed, tilted her head slightly, and replied with calm confidence, "I'm not trying to shock anyone." Her tone was soft, almost innocent, but everyone knew it wasn't true. Carson didn't argue. He simply raised an eyebrow, pressed his lips together, and offered a faint smile, an expression that sent the audience into laughter. There was no confrontation, no accusation, but everyone in the room understood. Johnny didn't believe a word she said. A director in the control room later recalled, "The place erupted." The way Johnny responded, without saying much, was pure Carson. At a time when most hosts were eager to please their famous guests, Carson took a different approach. He used intelligence and humor to draw a clear line between authenticity and performance. His reply was as light as air, yet so sharp in wit that no one could miss its sting. Madonna, who was used to controlling every narrative about herself, froze for a brief moment. For once, the woman who always knew how to command attention seemed unsure how to react. The camera caught her eyes, a flicker of surprise, followed by a faint, uneasy smile. It was one of those rare moments when the carefully crafted mask of performance slipped, revealing the person behind the icon of rebellion. A crew member later said, "She wasn't used to being thrown off like that." Most interviewers got pulled into her game. They were either shocked or they believed everything she said. But Johnny was different. He didn't have to raise his voice. One simple line, and everything unraveled. The conversation went on, but the energy in the room had shifted. Carson kept smiling, Madonna tried to regain her rhythm, but everyone could feel that the balance of power had changed. From that point on, the one in control wasn't the world's most powerful pop star, it was the host who understood human nature better than anyone else in the room. After the taping, Johnny was said to have joked with a colleague, "If she's not trying to shock people, she must be doing it at church." It wasn't cruel, just tinged with disappointment and irony. To Carson, honesty mattered more than image. He could appreciate performance, but he refused to accept pretense disguised as innocence. Someone from The Tonight Show crew once explained, Johnny didn't hate controversy. He'd interviewed guests far more provocative than Madonna. What he hated was phoniness, that fake innocence. That's what got under his skin. Carson believed that television, even as a stage, still owed a certain truth to its audience. When Madonna denied something the whole world could see, he chose the most elegant way to remind her that truth cannot be hidden behind a smile. After that night, Madonna never returned to The Tonight Show during Carson's tenure. No one said why, but everyone knew. A veteran producer revealed, she wasn't banned, but Johnny didn't want her back. He never said it outright, he just stayed silent. And with him, silence spoke louder than any refusal. That moment would later become a story retold countless times, a testament to Carson's mastery in handling delicate situations. He didn't humiliate, didn't sensationalize, but always let the truth surface, softly, naturally, and irresistibly. It wasn't just an exchange between two celebrities. It was a collision between two visions of truth, one built on image, the other grounded in subtle intelligence. And in that fleeting instant, the world saw that behind Johnny Carson's easy smile and quiet charm was a man unshakably devoted to authenticity, even if all it took was a single, raised eyebrow. Burt Reynolds was the kind of guest who could make The Tonight Show light up the moment he walked in. He carried with him a grin full of mischief and that effortless charm that always brought out Johnny Carson's best laughter. Between them was a chemistry that couldn't be faked, a mix of friendship, wit, and shared timing that turned every appearance into something audiences would never forget. And one of their most famous moments began with what looked like pure chaos. That night, Burt was in rare form. In the middle of their chat, he suddenly grabbed a can of shaving cream and threw it right at Johnny. The foam splattered everywhere, and the audience roared with laughter. Carson, still smiling through the mess, asked, "Was that really spontaneous?" Burt laughed and replied proudly, "Completely spontaneous, I swear." Carson didn't miss a beat. He opened his desk drawer, pulled out a cue card, held it up to the camera, and read aloud, "Burt throws shaving cream at Johnny." The audience exploded. Burt burst into laughter, caught red-handed, while Johnny looked at him with that sly, knowing smile, the kind only a longtime friend could give. Behind the scenes, the truth was simple, the entire gag had been carefully planned. The timing, the props, even the reaction shots, all rehearsed to perfection. But that's what made it brilliant. Both men understood that pretending it was spontaneous wasn't deception, it was part of the act. No one felt tricked. Carson knew the audience didn't really believe it was real, and Bert knew that the pretend spontaneity was what made it funnier. It was a performance within a performance, a wink shared between hosts and viewers alike. A longtime writer explained it best: it's like when a magician says, "This is just a normal hat," right before pulling out a rabbit. Nobody believes him, but that's part of the fun. The same rule applied here. Everyone knew the setup, yet they still laughed because of how cleverly it was exposed. For Carson, this wasn't the kind of lie that needed to be called out. It was art, a playful dance between truth and illusion. When Bert claimed it was all improvised, Johnny didn't call him a liar. Instead, he turned the moment into something sharper, funnier, more memorable. A director once said, watching Johnny and Bert together was like watching two jazz musicians. They knew each other's rhythm, when to lead, when to hold back, when to let the silence do the talking. Their partnership was built on trust and timing. Johnny guided the moment, Bert delivered the spark, and together they made television magic. Every laugh was earned, every glance shared, every beat timed to perfection. One producer described it as scripted reality before reality TV even existed. Everyone, Johnny, Bert, and the audience, understood the game. The joke wasn't about fooling anyone, it was about letting everyone in on the secret. Unlike other celebrities Carson gently exposed for stretching the truth, Bert's moments were different. Here, both the joke and its reveal were part of the show. It was comedy as collaboration, not confrontation. Years later, Carson fondly said, "He always found a way to get me messy, and he always made me laugh." That line summed it up perfectly: two friends who trusted each other enough to turn every prank into a shared masterpiece. Their moments together still feel timeless. Not because of the shaving cream or the jokes, but because they reminded people of what good television used to be: laughter built on trust, joy, and a friendship that never needed to fake a thing. Not everyone knows there was a night when Johnny Carson truly lost his composure on live television, and it happened with George Jessel. The taping took place in the early 1970s, when Carson was at the peak of his career, while Jessel was a relic of a bygone era, a vaudeville star once known as America's Toastmaster General. His brand of humor had been shaped in the 1920s and 1930s, and though it once filled theaters, it no longer fit the changing spirit of the time. That evening, Jessel entered the stage with the confidence of a man who'd owned every audience he'd faced. He began telling a joke, one he believed would land as it always had. But instead of laughter, an uneasy silence filled the studio. The joke carried tones of prejudice that had no place in the modern world. Carson's smile faded, and the warmth in the room vanished. Sensing the awkwardness, Jessel tried to justify himself, saying, "Everyone loves my work. They expect that from me." The statement only deepened the discomfort. Carson, keeping his composure, cut abruptly to a commercial break. Viewers at home could see the shift, his polite mask slipping just enough to reveal genuine disapproval. A crew member later recalled, "It was the first time I ever saw Johnny truly unsettled on air. He wasn't angry, just disappointed." After the taping, Carson reportedly called the material disgusting and told his producer it didn't belong on his show. From that moment, Jessel's name quietly disappeared from the guest list forever. Carson had handled falsehoods before: boasts, exaggerations, even fabricated stories, usually with wit and charm. But this was different. Jessel wasn't just lying about his popularity, he was defending a kind of humor that the world had already left behind. To Carson, that wasn't nostalgia, it was ignorance. One of the show's writers later said, "Johnny had boundaries. He could laugh at vanity, but never at cruelty." He believed entertainment had to evolve, and that comedians had a responsibility to read the room, to understand the world they were speaking to. Jessel's inability to do that made his performance feel not just outdated, but wrong. Behind the scenes, the incident became a quiet lesson for everyone who worked on the show. A director remembered, Johnny didn't like confrontation. But if someone disrespected the audience, that was it. They were done. For viewers, it was a rare glimpse of Carson's moral compass. He didn't scold Jessel on air or turn the moment into drama, but his silence spoke louder than words. That restraint, that quiet refusal to participate, was his way of saying enough. Jessel, once adored by millions, simply didn't realize that the world had moved on. He believed audiences still cherished his brand of humor, but times had changed. What once drew laughter now brought discomfort. In the shifting landscape of comedy, being unable to evolve meant being left behind. The night with George Jessel revealed something profound about Johnny Carson. Beneath the charm and composure was a man who valued integrity over easy laughs. He knew that humor, to endure, must also respect. And when that respect disappeared, so did the laughter. Jessel walked off the Tonight Show stage for the last time that night. Carson, ever the professional, carried on as usual the next day. But for those who were there, it marked a turning point, a quiet but powerful reminder that true entertainment isn't just about getting laughs, but about knowing where not to cross the line. That night, the backstage of The Tonight Show was buzzing with energy. Voices calling out, hurried footsteps, laughter mixed with nerves, everything felt like any other live broadcast. But no one could have guessed that one of the show's most haunting behind-the-scenes moments would begin with a seemingly harmless sentence, "I'm completely fine with waiting." The man who said it was Chuck Berry, the rock and roll legend whose electric performances had once set entire crowds ablaze. That evening, Berry was scheduled to perform near the end of the show. But earlier segments ran longer than expected, delaying his performance. A young production assistant was sent to the green room to inform him and gauge his reaction. The assistant later recalled, he smiled, calm and polite, said he was totally fine with waiting. Everyone breathed easier. A superstar being this patient, that was rare in show business. Johnny Carson, the host, even smiled when he heard the report. He'd dealt with many temperamental musicians before, so this was a relief. But that sense of ease didn't last long. Backstage, Berry's calm demeanor began to fade. Those nearby noticed a shift. He paced back and forth, checked his watch repeatedly, his breathing growing heavier. The patience he projected moments earlier was merely a mask. The longer the show went on, the more agitated he became. Each burst of audience laughter from another guest only seemed to make things worse. One crew member remembered, he didn't say a word. Just stood up, grabbed his guitar, and walked straight out the door. By the time anyone realized Berry was gone, only minutes remained before his scheduled performance. Panic rippled through the crew. A replacement act was scrambled together, the director barked orders through his headset, and technicians rushed to fill the gap. On stage, Johnny Carson remained the picture of composure. He didn't mention Berry's sudden departure, smoothly transitioning into a short comedy bit instead. His voice steady, his smile unwavering, the mark of a seasoned professional. But to those behind the scenes, it was chaos. When it was all over, Carson merely chuckled. One team member recalled him saying, "Next time someone tells me they're fine, I'll ask, 'Fine, or Chuck Berry fine?'" The phrase became an inside joke among Tonight Show staff for years. Whenever someone hid their frustration behind a polite smile, someone would whisper, "That's a real Chuck Berry fine." What seemed like a minor incident left a deep mark. Carson wasn't quick to anger, but he valued honesty above all in his work. To him, show business could tolerate vanity and exaggeration, but not deceit that made others suffer the consequences. Berry's sudden walkout wasn't just an artist losing his temper, it threw dozens of hard-working crew members into chaos. A veteran producer later said, "Johnny knew the line between artistic pride and disrespect for others. Berry crossed that line." Carson never publicly criticized him, but Berry was never invited back. For Carson, that quiet decision spoke louder than any reprimand. The story of Berry's polite lie spread through television circles as a lesson in how even a small falsehood could have huge consequences. It revealed another side of Carson, the calm, charming host who, beneath the surface, had firm moral boundaries. He believed a live show was a shared effort, and its success relied entirely on mutual trust. Years later, when asked about that night, Carson simply said, "If he'd just been honest about being upset, we could have worked around it." But when he said he was fine, then walked out, there was nothing anyone could do. It wasn't just a reflection on professionalism, it was a timeless lesson in how honesty holds everything together. When the studio lights finally dimmed that night, conversation still swirled among the crew. Some sympathized with Berry, saying artists have their limits. But most understood that this went beyond emotions, it was about accountability. It was a reminder that honesty, even when uncomfortable, keeps everything running smoothly. Johnny Carson knew that better than anyone, and that's why the words "I'm completely fine with waiting" became a legendary moment in Tonight Show history, a quiet symbol of how every on-screen smile depends on genuine effort and truth behind the scenes. As the studio lights faded, everyone realized that Johnny Carson wasn't just a master of humor, he was a man who could see through the glittering facade of Hollywood. With just a subtle smile or a raised eyebrow, he could make the truth unfold before millions of viewers. Those moments when he exposed lies on live television didn't just bring laughter, they reminded us that honesty shines brighter than any spotlight. In a world full of scripts and illusions, Carson proved that authenticity is what keeps audiences watching until the very end. If you love stories that reveal the hidden side of fame, Don't forget to subscribe and follow our channel to uncover more untold secrets from Hollywood's golden age.